So I just wanted to make a few remarks also. In the 1980s, I tended to hang out with poet and composer Franz Kamen and Charles Stein, which was usually at a rehearsal for or performance of Franz Kamen's performance pieces. I witnessed how immediately these two guys, upon greeting each other, would continue their ongoing, for years, conversation about Parmenides, whom I knew nothing about, the way you and I might ask each other, did you see such and such show the other night? I thought from the talk that he was a Greek mathematician, and I intended to research Parmenides further, but I guess I was not ready. Decades after, I had a meditational epiphany. There was a quick glimpse of isness and not isness. And the way it arrived, it was as though not isness was like an exit you miss on the highway. Could have happened, or it could have not happened, actually, or it could have not happened. It was a quiet realization, and I'm not saying it was aligned with Parmenides in the way Stein has shown us, but also not saying it was not aligned. But within 2 weeks or so after that, Charles Stein, George Quasha, and the poet Barbara Barg independently recommended, and without explicit connection to my epiphany, because I had not discussed it, that I read Peter Kingsley's Reality. Chuck Stein has been so patient and kind with my subsequent explorations. At my request, he sent me early versions of his Parmenides projects, now selected from in this soon-to-be-published Station Hill book. I love Stein's The Light of Hermes, and I chose these stanzas from the Poimandres, which I had read previously in G.R.S. Mead's translation, because the feeling that Stein's translation engenders is so thrilling. The enactment of a double, at least a double, layered description involvement of creation, mind energies, and higher self-reception of presence is delineated poetically in the dialogue immediately and with an immediacy. The measure Stein finds is liberated and accessible and releases us from ponderousness. Whatever one may think about the origins, authorship, and spiritual streams of the Corpus Hermeticum, the voice that comes forth is compassionate, loving, and resonates with utter knowing, and across the eons invites you close to this ancient dialogue and close to epiphanic possibility. G.R.S. Mead wrote of thrice greatest Hermes, I found greater pleasure in the spiritual atmosphere they created than in the critical considerations which insistently impose themselves upon my mind. Anyone who cares about the teachings and story of Christ and encounters Poimandres is going to have to grapple with some troubling yet exhilarating synergies. I find Stein's comment in relation to atemporality, here's his quote, this knowledge is not a matter of accepting a doctrine, but it does involve the acquisition of an intuition, to be very helpful in this regard also. Thank you, Chuck Stein, and thank you all.
Thank you, Kim. Can you hear me? Can
Yes.
everybody hear me? Okay, great. So thank you for introducing the text of Poimandres. I guess one thing that you didn't say is, you said that Poimandres himself in the course of the text identifies himself as the mind, nous of the authentic one, which you didn't mention is the name itself. Poimandres for a long time was interpreted as the shepherd of men, and Chuck quotes a different possible etymology that was suggested by Kingsley, that it's not replacing the original, but it's sort of an alternative reading, which brings Poimandres to the Egyptian, and then he becomes the one who has the gnosis of Ra, which kind of links it to our earlier conversation about Hermes and who is Hermes, or who is the Hermetic figure. Hermes in the tradition that links him to thought. Hermes thought as the thought psychopompus, who I think Kim mentioned, is sometimes referred as the blood of Ra, the blood of Ra. So this kind of comes together pretty well in this context. So I am going to read from this last fragment of the Poimandres. I'm also going to say that it comes pretty much in all versions of the Corpus Hermeticum. Poimandres comes as the first text for various reasons, but in the logic which I like to follow is that the figure itself of who becomes the main figure of the whole Corpus Hermeticum, Hermes Trismegistus, is not yet fully manifested, not fully realized, not fully configured in the way that he is in later texts. And in fact, the Poimandres is a sort of blueprint of an initiation. And Hermes enters the text as a humble initiate. He is the young Hermes at this point, and only in course of this text becomes this figure empowered by transmission and by his own realization. He becomes the figure of Hermes Trismegistus, who is then present in all the Corpus Hermeticum. So in this sense, this text is a blueprint of a Hermetic initiation, but it is also, and I'm taking a risk by saying this, I think that at least this last fragment, which I'm going to read, is somewhat performative in the sense that it is the initiation itself. And so I'm going to start it from this moment when Hermes already grasps a certain sense of his teaching. He is coming to the brink of the realization, and he asks his final question, and the answer to the question takes him to the heart of his own initiation. So this is in the book, it's on the page 210 at the very top. And I'll read it now and then maybe say a couple more things. You have taught me all things well, just as I wished, O mind. But tell me something else. How shall I myself go up to life? Speak to me about this also, O Poimandres. When it is time to die, your body itself will be the first to change, and the visible from that you now and the visible form that you now possess shall no longer be visible. Your character shall go back to its diamond, so that it no longer applies to you, and your bodily senses return to their sources, becoming a part of the cosmos, to be combined again in another being, and your will, your intent, your desire shall take up residence in some non-reasoning nature. But the man himself that remains goes up in sequence through the cosmic structure. To the first zone, the moon, he releases his energy, that which works increase and brings decay. To Mercury, the second zone, he surrenders his cunning. To Venus, the third, the folly of desire. To Jupiter, the fourth zone, goes arrogance, the will to domination. To Mars, the fifth, audacity, unmindful, precipitous daring. To Saturn, the sixth zone, greed and the lust for money. And to the seventh, the Sun, he surrenders bad faith, mendacity, and the wish to do harm. And then, stripped naked of all that in him had become actual, through the sevenfold harmonic of the cosmic structure, he takes to zone 8, the Ogdoad, in possession now of his own proper power. And he sings hymns to the Father together with the other beings that he finds there. And those that are present rejoice with him who has come. And being established as of a similar nature to those with whom he now dwells, he hears the potencies who have their nature beyond Zone 8, the Ennead, singing the God with a voice unique to themselves. And then, in proper order, those who have accomplished this much go up to the Father and requiesce in those same potencies, in coming such potencies themselves. They enter the good. This is the goal, this is the consummation. For those that have gone in, now have the gnosis, and are the knowers themselves. Why delay? You have everything. Why not become a guide to the worthy so that the generations of the Anthropos may be saved through you and by the God? And saying these things to me, Poimandres faded away and mixed in the region of the powers. And I inscribed in myself the manifestation of the Poimandres, and being filled up with that for which I had craved, was very happy. The sleep of my body had become alertness of the soul, the closing of my eyes, true vision, and my silence pregnant with broods of wisdom to come. Holy art thou, Lord of the universe. Holy art thou, whom nature hath not formed. Holy art thou, the vast and the mighty one, Lord of the light and the darkness. So, well, first of all, Chuck, thank you for this text. And I feel that we have several elements here. One, that it precisely gives us this hermetic, this figure of Hermes in development, in the process of his own empowerment, where at the end he is our connection to the mind and our connection because he imprinted in himself that which he grasped. But I'm not reading literally. Most of you had prepared texts. I'm sort of have a bunch of notes which I will present quickly, and then we can talk about it. So the question, the final ultimate question is, how shall I myself go up to life? And the answer, which goes against common sense, is be initiated into death. And in fact, this sequence of question and response, how shall I myself go up to life when it is time to die, that transition, I would call it rather a jump. It's an abrupt jump. And in a poetic way, it literally pulls the hood over the initiate's head. It gives us a poetic equivalent, just a single line gives us a poetic equivalent of the image that we see on the Lovatali urn of an initiate who sits with a hood of sensory deprivation. And I think the fact that Chuck's translating from the Greek and translating in a very economic way, I would say. Economic, modern, facilitates that we can go through this text and go through the same process that Hermes goes. And so, like I'm saying, the answer is completely goes against the ordinary common sense. Nonetheless, this kind of pattern of initiation into death and rebirth, the tearing down of energies of one's own mundane being in order to recognize the core being, it's fairly common throughout the Mediterranean basin at the time, in Egypt, in Greek or Roman world, and way, way beyond. So we are getting a certain blueprint of an initiation. The way Parmenides goes about it is, of course, he talks about the man himself is stripped naked of all the senses. And here he talks about these senses that are weighed down by earth, by flesh, and by something he calls the planetary sheaves, which are in fact the accretions, astrological accretions of one's own incarnation. And again, very beautiful, poetic dance of the planets, where all these aspects, all these envelopes are stripped and sent back to the cosmos on the way to be recycled in some sense. That is very clear in Poimandres, that our energies can go back and be recycled. Another, and here I also want to mention that there is another term, another aspect of looking at those planetary sheaves that goes, it's connected with the astrological, but it is the aspect of the that's brought up by the authors of Piscis Sophia and by Basilides, like those Gnostics refer to the planetary sheaves as the counterfeit pneuma, that which is sort of negative or obscuring counterpart of logos. I'll leave it at this point. Those also have to be shed in the process of ascendance and the initiation. And here I would say that with this word pneuma comes my very personal interest in Poimandres and in this whole emanative system. It is, and Chuck, you can correct me. You can be the Poimandres at this, and I can be the initiate. You could feel free to contradict me. But for me, it is that somewhat uncharacteristically to the Greeks, the Poimandres seems to pay attention, at least in some way, to the vocal auditory aspects of the illuminative process. And why uncharacteristically to the Greeks? I just bring very quickly Chuck's work about Persephone, and in the myth itself, the meter hears about the abduction of her daughter. This is just hearsay. That's the first, but she first hears it. But in order to make it the truth, she has to see it with her own eyes. And then that structure, the narrative of the myth, is then reflected in the structure of the Eleusinian mysteries, where the culmination is seeing the goddess. So is a problem? No. So that is generally the tendency of the Greeks. Again, Hermes breaks with this predominant visual view, and Poimandres himself seems to be saying that this illuminative force is both sound and air-driven, and light-producing, and that there is a synergy, there is a synesthetic relationship between the two. This synesthesia is emphasized over and over. What then, asks Hermes, know by looking at and by listening to that which is in you. And so in this initiation, where Hermes is first a medium who connects with the mind of the authentic one, and later he is our connection for the generations, he is our connection to that which brings forth breath as pneuma charging voice and sound, and a pneuma that facilitates this synesthesia and that links together vision, voice, and sound. And yeah, and if minding the light, I'm almost finished. If minding the light and is the work of the initiate, it happens in a certain in-betweenness. And here I want to thank our friend Bob, Robert Podgórski. I see his square down there, so he's probably listening, for bringing in the term metaikmion. Metaikmion is a Greek military term that's sometimes translated as no man's land, or the land in between two approaching armies. But the 3rd century Neoplatonist Synesius uses this very same term to describe the pneuma that operates in the word. And it is, in this case, the shared space between the corporeal and incorporeal, the spirit and the matter, the rational and the irrational. This is basically my what I wanted to say about the Poimandres. Having discussed it with Chuck, we of course agreed that this, if listening and listen to, if that is a very subtle balance in the Poimandres itself, the emphasis on the listening is much more prominent in the hymn to Hermes. And just to close this, if I have one more minute, I would like very much to read a fragment from Hymn to Hermes, which is the Oracle of the Bees. Is that okay?
Do it.
Sure. Maybe we could move it to, because we're running into a temporal.
Okay. All right, then it's fine.
I want
Kim,
it.
you need to unmute if you want to jump in.
You
Thank you
want
so
it?
much, Dorota, and I don't mean to cut you off. I think, Kim, maybe you've got something to say. I did want to say on the screen that Matthew Morse had written prior to the Poimandres. He wrote a 3-syllable and 2-line poem, remembering that Dis is another word for Hades, and his statement is disappear, relative to this idea of the initiation, Dorota. I thought that might relate. So maybe we could have a little open, anybody that wants to say anything.
Wait. I want to say something. I want to say something, okay? I think that this issue, the way that she's bringing this up, is a big theme that has been accumulating. And reading the Bees passage is actually important to what's really going on. So I'd really like her to do that.
It's very short. This really, it's 1 minute. But let me tell you another thing. Illustrious son of Maya and of Zeus, Aegis holder, messenger quick as death, diamond of the gods, there exist 3 holy sisters, 3 virgins who exult in their swift wings. On their heads is a dust of white meal. They dwell in houses under a ridge of Parnassus, teachers of divination, independent of myself. When I was a herd lad, I practiced their art, though my father considered it not worth his attention. From their station, they flit about hither and yon, feeding on honeycombs, bringing each thing to pass. Eating yellow honey stimulates them, so that when they consume it, they wish to speak the truth, but withhold from them the sweet food of gods, and when they swarm together like raging maenads, they utter falsehoods only. So I commend them to you. Make particular inquiry of them to your heart's delight, and if you teach their art to some mortal person, your pupil will hear in their sound, for the most part, your response, as fortune falls. Okay.
Absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. I am fulfilled, Sam, and I thought that Dorota's presentation was exquisite. I'm going to suggest a little change, which was that we were going to have the Chaldean oracles and then take a break. Let's take another 4-minute break, and then we will return with the Chaldean oracles unless anybody strongly disagrees.
Okay.
You're good with that, Sam?
Yeah,
Yes,
let's see
yes,
you.
yes.
Let's convene in 4. Many thanks.
In 4. Okay.
And Kim, you might want to douse the, or, pause the recording. Okay.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. And we are going to go forth into the Chaldean oracles with George Quasha.
Okay. Am I coming to full screen for you?
Yes.
Okay, that's good thing. Okay. Okay, first I'd like to just thank you and everybody else involved with this, and Dorota for that terrific presentation that feeds into the spirit of what I would like to present. And I'll try to keep mine brief because I think we're running into a little time issue here. It's the Chaldean oracles, 2nd century mysterious texts that only come to us in fragments, which you can read about in the book, are in the spirit of, I think what came up to in this session so far in Joel's reading of the Homeric hymn to Hermes, in the section that says that this incursion, this swift thought incursion, becomes the practice of noble Hermes to weave word and deed together in a single action. So in terms of the sequence of things here, I think of that as the kind of what we have in the Chaldean oracles. We have words as action in a very particular kind of mind sense. So I'll just read a small number of these there. Chuck includes 87 of these, which is possibly maybe half of the original, and gives them his own order. I'll honor that order and just read some at the beginning, 1 or 2 in the middle, and several at the end. They're very brief. Okay? You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Although clad in clamorous light, arming mind and soul with trident force, throw the entire synthema of the triad into your being, nor frequent the watercourse of the celestial fire flux in a distracted manner. Rather, concentrate. There exists a certain mind thing. To it, one must put mind's flower. And if you incline mind to it, as if attending some thing, you are not minding that. It is the very possibility of mightiness, flushing circumambient light in mental sectors. And do not attend it with vehemence, but by means of the long extended flame of mind that measures all things, but not that one mind thing. And do not hold mind to it with an obstinate intensity, but facing the eye of your soul the other way, turn an empty mind toward that one mind thing in order to study that mind thing, because it already exists outside the mind. It is not possible to adduce a name for it, as if a name could be adapted to it. This, therefore, what is beyond all things is only referred to as the one by those desiring to utter the ineffable. The mind of the Father has sewn symbols down to the world. The mind, that is, that thinks the intelligibles. They are said to be things of ineffable beauty. For all things that issue from the one and to the one return are divided intellectually into many bodies. Do not retain in your mind the multiplicitous otherness, but amplify the intelligence in the soul toward the one. Urge yourself onward to the center of the clamorous light. Unlock the immortal depth of soul. Let your eyes fly up, up, up. That was in his sections 1 through 8. So 27 to 30 now. Visible from everywhere, she has faces on all sides and sends forth vessel channels of embodied life, containing within her the center from which all beings proceed. About her womb on the right, a hollow full of lumpy gruel gushes abundantly. It is the primordial font of psychic fluid ensouling abundantly light, ether, fire, worlds. On the left side of her womb, there lies the source of virtue, remaining wholly within, not giving up the virgin state. From the back of the goddess is hung inexhaustible nature. Says Hecate, after the paternal thoughts, I, the Psyche, dwell ensouling all things with my heat. Sunfire fixed in the place of the heart, sun world entirely luminous. So moving now to the in section. Starting with 72. Many-minded truth is in the depths. Since the soul is a pantomorphic image, it possesses the principles of everything that is. Thus, a hidden order embraces the whole noetic realm with a single form. Now moving to 80. Says Hecate, after dawn burst splendor infinite, full of stars, I left the unpolluted house of God and stepped on life-fostering earth according to your request, persuaded by those ineffable words in which a mortal person delights in delighting the mind of the immortals. Drawing them out of the ether by means of secret lunges, you easily lead them to earth against their will, but the middle beings, The ones who ride the middle winds, far from the god fire, you take them for split-voiced mortals, as if they were oracular dreams, shamefully doing the demons harm. It has both. It holds mind things in the mind and brings sensuous perception to the worlds. Paternal intellect, self-engendered, having conceived his works, inseminated everything with a fire-burdened chain of love, that all things might go on loving till time without limit, that things woven by the intellective light of the Father never fall. The principles that know the intellective acts of the Father conceals them in an ambience of sensible and somatic workings. Ideas are at once separated and compounded by the chain of wondrous love that first leapt from the mind fire, engarmenting chained fire, so as to blend together the mixing bowls of the sources while holding forth the flower of his fire. For Ion alone, imbued with the strength of the Father, copiously culling the flower of mind, has the wherewithal to know the Father, mind, imparting it to all, principles and sources, sustaining their constant vortex in ceaseless motion. Hecate indeed is the source and spring of blessed intellection, for the first power receives the birth of all in her unspeakable womb hollows and pours it forth on the all as it runs its course. So that's those wonderful texts.
Thanks, George.
Well, thank you, Chuck. Now let me, I did
No, it's
write
interesting that,
yeah, go ahead.
oh,
No,
no,
go,
no,
go.
you're, just there's a typographic thing I didn't catch, which is that in their typeface, a capital I is indistinguishable from a small L. And so that it's not lunges, it's Junges.
Junges. Very
The
interesting.
thing,
Yeah, because I wondered about that
Junges, yeah.
because it felt to me like a,
What is that about? Yeah, lunges. Yeah, no, it's not lunges, it's spiral.
yeah,
And also, yeah, we had the Prometheus lineage of Idiopatos, not Lapatos.
right.
So it's happened. Yeah.
That's a very strange thing.
Okay. Anyway, go on. Sorry, I didn't really mean
That's
to.
all right. I
break
just
your
want to
thought.
say a few complimentary things to about you that I had to write them down
Yeah,
because
well,
I knew I wouldn't be able to say them in just directly.
out loud. Well, you're forgiven.
If you'll forgive me doing this. Anyway, because we're here to celebrate this enormously valuable book that fills the gap we scarcely knew was there in such magnitude. It feels like nothing less than a gift from the muse by way of you, Chuck. I remember asking Robert Duncan what he thought of Pope's translation of Homer into heroic couplets. And he said, it's a poet's translation. That's always got a gift. Obviously, Pope's approach is the opposite in a certain sense of forcing that poem into heroic couplets. But I was interested in that response. And while I've been reading Chuck's translations and commentaries for decades, I admit to being astonished by this book. It felt like something I've waited my whole life for. Already, his Odyssey gave us the first version of the poem with an implicit poetics that belongs to the poesis we work in. You can hear a possible Homeric voice that actually speaks to you. Light of Hermes goes even further. It gives us both the realized poesis and its full-bodied poetics. This means that you can hardly read these poetically realized texts and their luminous commentaries without directly experiencing their force in another kind of realization, the work of knowing one's own mind. For some years, we posited a sort of inter-genre distinction as the poem of the mind, a notion first suggested by Stevens, the poem of the mind in the act of finding what will suffice. This Hermes assemblage finally gives such a notion a true foundation. This would be poetry for those willing to engage mind as a state of language, paradoxically in touch with the ineffable and unspeakable in every actual word spoken. And it does so without the intermediary stage of belief in something. It invokes a state of initiation into further being through a further linguality. Its performativity may well seem indistinguishable from the theurgic itself. And this is where the notion, the Corban notion that you make so much of, that the text itself is the secret, is what we would now say is the text is Hermes. What translator can bring this about when guided by a special tuning in language mind? It offers a parallel vision to the source text generated inside one's own language. In this instance, the texts have been under alchemical strength pressure for over half a century and slowly evolving. This is not only a literary adventure, it discovers what goes by the name Hermes as a living transmission, one that even infuses texts that never mention the name Hermes, and it perpetuates that transmission in a living poesis. The result is a textual process that literally instructs the reading mind, a processual theurgy that reinvents reading. The Stein translation poetics involves a deep reading of visionary language, first at the particle level, an approach worked out in decades of focus on the Parmenides poem and its journey inside the verb to be, which in the Chaldean oracles offers a vision of how mind retains its powerful open focus. In the second text, the second text that I read earlier, that invokes a certain mind thing, it warns. And if you incline mind to it as if attending something, you're not minding that. This is a veritable esoteric instruction in contemplative mind focus, literally beyond belief. It instructs in the paradoxical necessity of holding the mind thing in awareness so that it retains its primordial presence, not a firm grip, but a self-presence, a self-regenerate coming into presence, something like an exact surface tension, a holding in presence as critical as a soap bubble and its state of iridescence. The grammatical equivalent is the middle voice and its state of radical receptivity and its discipline of sustaining tension between. So that's what I didn't think I'd be able to say.
Thank you, George.
Beautiful.
Thanks.
Mm. I think we're feeling the moment. Just
it's about it happening inside language. That's what's so amazing. You don't expect to read translations that bring you to the very possibility of evolving a state of mind through language. You go to poetry for that. And that's what distinguishes the poet translator. Even there may be translators who don't claim to be poets, but who somehow find that poet in their language, in their own being, and make that happen inside translation. But that's very rare, very rare. So I wanted to celebrate that fact.
Yeah, it's only through a kind of inauthenticity that you can summon the voice of the mind of the authentic one. That's my, I have something to say to you, George, actually, amazing thing about a view of me that you used to say that whenever I would meet some intellectual and I sort of get into his thing or her thing, and you'd say that I always am able to come on like a true believer.
Mhm.
And I have discovered what that's really about.
Oh, yeah.
Why I am that way. I'm still that way. You say something. My first impulse. It's not even an impulse. It's just that I hear it. If I don't hear it, I don't. But if I hear it, I hear it. That's.
Mhm. But that's what keeps it at the edge.
Yeah, it's a thing that has a psychological detriment as its initiating cause, but in fact becomes a tool.
Yeah. But
George, you used that.
Sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
Wait,
Oh,
Sam,
you
Edward Casey wanted to say something for quite a while. Do you mind if we just hold that and then let Ed?
I'll hold that thought.
Okay, thank you so much, Sam.
Go ahead.
I just wonder, George, if you could say some more about the relationship between the phrase inexhaustible nature, which you cited earlier, and then the role of mind, particularly poetic mind, and how these two are linked in your poetics, but perhaps also in the Chaldean text. Mind and inexhaustible nature, they sound like very different directions to go, but somehow I suspect that they're closely related for you. And how are they?
Yeah, well, I thank you, Ed. Chuck will have to talk about his choice of the term inexhaustible nature, because I can't gloss that actual textual thing. But what it means to me, and you're right to sort of bring it up, is that I speak with a very specific angle of things. As a practitioner of Dzogchen, what that means is that mind itself is inexhaustible, and it discovers its own nature to be inexhaustible. And therefore, anything that manifests, whether it's language or nature, and I put them on the same plane. That's my heresy. My heresy is that everything is alive and language is alive, and the state of mind that we're working within inside language is the discovery of that and keeping it at that particular edge. Chuck's statement that he comes at things with a kind of force of immediate belief in the power of the thing that he's engaging is, I think, how we need to live that way, only to find at that edge its further nature is beyond what we're believing, because believing is a fixed focus and holds us back from the wondrous adventure of remaining at that edge, which you've written about so brilliantly in your book, The World on Edge. I don't know if I'm addressing the question or not, really. But maybe we'll have to talk about inexhaustible nature as the phrase.
Yeah. That's definitely an obscure image. Exactly what it means that the universe, that nature is hanging from Hecate's back, in this context of the two wombs, and I've thought about that in ways that I couldn't really commentate very much, except that it seems to be suggesting the aspect of, this is why you always get the Neoplatonists involved, the aspect of the hypostasis, that's psyche, that the psyche has, on the one hand, is receiving that which is timeless, coming from the nous. On the other hand, it's precisely what she receives that generates the world of sense and the world of time. And so it's like there's a transcendent, timeless virgin womb, and then there's the actual womb of nature. nature being that which is created, that which is, you can run it through the different theologies for what the nature means. But it seemed to me that the phrase inexhaustible nature suggests nature as generative and as fecundity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Inexhaustible in
sense.
that sense of, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's, I don't remember even what
Yeah.
the Greek word was right at this point, but that's what was in my being. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great.
Sam, you were going to say something?
Oh, yeah, I was just gonna say, you used the phrase, George, in talking about the work, surface tension, about Chuck's practice. And I was just wondering if you could say some more about that. It seems as though it might relate to what we've been talking about with Ed Casey, the idea of the edge. And yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, this is actually a very primary notion. I think that the poetics is actually an attempt to help us understand how that works so that we can actually, it's performative. I mean, a bubble has a certain surface tension, and if it is a little less or a little more, there's no bubble. It's that uncompromising, absolute quality of self-containment that produces that moment without more or less than is necessary for it to perform its nature. And we look for that in our practice, I say, and that's really what constitutes the poetics. That is to say, the line is not perfect only because it's semantically correct or it translates, if it's a translation, exactly another text, but that it finds in its actual rhythmic self-presentation that quality of presence that gives it that integrity of is a bubble that sustains itself as it moves up in the air.
How's that different from, I think it was Robert Louis Stevenson who said something like, poetry is the right words in the right order.
Well, that's a little more pedestrian, but I think, I mean, that could be said about a good political speech.
Sure. Yeah, but the manifestation still within a, I don't know, two-dimensional world is still, one is still in that syntax, but no, I
But
totally.
The notion of a right order is not predetermined. That's the point.
No. Oh,
And-
dig it. Yeah, I understand.
And
For
so-
the
so
occasion
if
is
you make
what
a
you're
like
posting. I understand.
the right words in the right order, you're presuming a standard that is noble outside that line. What this approach to poetics would say is that there is no such standard. It's all a
Totally,
singularity.
man. I would, the poetics of engagement, of being, of enacting is implicit. I understand, George.
It's a performative act.
I have a question, but first I really want to express gratitude to you, Chuck, for taking decades and decades of your life and dedicating it to these wisdom texts, and finally pulling it off in publication. I have a question, though, about the idea of the timeless womb, because usually we think of a womb as a place for something that's developing, and what could be developing in the timeless womb?
Well, that's why it's a paradox. That's why the whole image of the virgin birth, or all the other places where the paradox of being Virgo intact, or already have a broken system for giving birth. So to say that the same being is both a virgin and a mother, which is like Meister Eckhart's formulation of that in one of his sermons, is that both a virgin and a wife, And he goes into the relationship between that paradox and the paradox between the imageless nature of one's ultimate soul and one's personality. So there's a whole world in which that paradox is laid onto each other, and is sitting there in these oracles, that she has these two wombs, one of which is intact and the other which is broken.
Chuck, you have given us a beautiful entree into the vision of Isis. It's a perfect moment with what you just said.
Okay.
Menachem, if you had a response, do you think you could hold that until we're done?
Yeah, sure.
It's lovely to hear from you. Okay. So Alana, are you at the ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. So I will be reading Chuck's translation of the Vision of Isis. And I was trying to think about how to encapsulate the story of which the dream vision of the vision of Isis is in. And I looked to the left in my office that I'm in, and I saw this, oh, can you see it? It's this drawing, can't really see it, of a donkey, of an ass that a friend the poet Brenda Jima had drawn about 10 years ago. And it was an interesting synchronicity because Chuck had translated this hymn on a birthday of mine, probably also 10 years ago, or maybe even longer than that. And my birthday is on Halloween, and there's something about that. I was just thinking of how it relates to what I will comment on the dream vision, in the sense of the ever-changing nature of appearance, and particularly beauty. I felt like Chuck handing this hymn to me on my birthday was a gift and acknowledgement of how I love anything that's sparkling or glimmering or glistening or glowing. And I felt like Chuck handing that to me was an acknowledgement of him seeing that in me, but also an invitation to go further into the glimmering or the shimmering, and go deeper into the nature of beauty. So anyhow, the vision of Isis is from the Metamorphosis by Apuleius, and is had by Lucius, who was turned into an ass for doing black magic, necromancy and other things, but then is initiated into the cult of Isis. And this dream vision of Isis, I guess, is on the brink of him returning into human form. Chuck, is there any, and also Chuck's translation, it was written in Latin in prose form, but Chuck now said it in free verse. And Chuck, is there anything else you want to add to that?
No, that's
okay. Yeah. I tried to slim it down. Yeah. So I'll read the poem in its totality, and then I wrote something beforehand. So, the vision of Isis. And then there emerged arising from the middle of the ocean a countenance whose beauty was venerated even by the gods. And little by little, her body entire shook off the sea, and a lucid phantom vision stood before me. Oh, let me try to retrieve that miraculous splendor for you, if the poverty of human utterance will concede to me the faculty to discourse upon it, or if the goddess herself might supply sumptuous enough an abundance of eloquence to sing of it. First, her hair, most copious, rich, inviting, and gently curled, flowed down her goddess neck. At the crown of her head, a crown of flowers, intricate and various. And at the midpoint of her forehead, a disc in the manner of a mirror, or rather a figure of the moon, burned white light, To the right and to the left of it, coils of small serpents rearing, and ears of Demeter's wheat stretched out above it. Her garment was woven of many-colored linen, now luminous white with dazzling candor, now of a yellow crocus bloom, now the flaming redness of a rose, and something else that for some time inspired my deep silence. A black mantle with a sable luster, curling back and surrounding her, running along her right side and up to her left shoulder, part of it in a flap folding under a boss between her breasts, but hanging in pleats like a many-storied turret, till it flowed to its ultimate edge in fringes, gorgeously knotted. And woven into its border and all over the mantle itself trembled a plain of scattered stars, in the midst of which the full moon blew forth flaming fire. Wherever the hem of that remarkable garment fluttered, you saw a chaplet devised of every kind of flower, and every manner of fruit clung to it entangled within an indivisible lacing. She carried emblematic objects, many and various, in her right hand a bronze rattle, and through it a narrow strip curved back like a baldric with a few rods drawn across it, and it rang with subtle sonorities as she moved her arm in triple time. From her left hand dangled a goblet, above whose golden handle slithered an asp, head reared high, wide-necked tumescent. Her feet beneath her, fragrant with ambrosia, sported foot gear woven from victory palms. Such indeed was her splendor, as if she herself emitted scents from Felix Arabia. Once she'd completely come into her manifest apparency, she favored me with her goddess voice. Excited by your entreaties, I come to you, I, the mother of all natural things, the mistress of the elements, first progeny of the ages, highest of beings numinous, queen of the dead, first among the celestials, the one from whom all gods and goddesses take their appearances. I dispose with my nod the luminous heights of the heavens, the salubrious breath of the sea, the silent solemnities of the infernal regions. My Godhead is singular but venerated by the whole world under innumerable apparencies, in various rites and under a congeries of names. Here the Phrygians, firstborn of humans, know me as Pessamuntia, mother of the gods. There the autochthonous Atticans call me Cecropian Minerva. The wave-washed Cyprians have me as Paphian Aphrodite. To the arrow-bearing Cretans, I am Dictina Diana. In Sicily, where they speak in three tongues, I am Ortygian Proserpina. To the people of Eleusis, Demeter. Some say I am Hera, some Bellona, some Hecate, still others Rhamnusia. But the folk of the two Ethiopias, who are illumined by the first rays of the sun god, and the people of Egypt, strong in primordial doctrine, honor me in ceremonial most proper to myself, and call me by my true name, Isis, Isis Regina, Isis the Queen. Now what I've written. What does it mean to be a queen? More than power or prestige, before civility or clout, a queen to me means presence, lineage, or a lineage of presence, and the irony alongside of that. When you are queen, you are destined to be queen. You were born into rightfulness, a throne upon which and a crown under which from you are emboldened, circumscribed, sanctified. If only all of us, the remaining laity, could be granted the confidence, commanded, or just given the permission to feel numinously surrounded, not by the right to rule, but the right to exist. Outer rituals of inner emphases endure, in baptisms, bar and bat mitzvahs. The outer cannot ensure or seal the inner, but if the outer is no longer separate from the inner, what do you do to bring yourself further into existence? Isis, her name, remarked upon for its evocative homophony, bridges the ancient with the present. Is, you may have heard prior, to be twice doubled, to be flooded into the waters of life, then fixed by the upright recitation of a foreign language with strange melodies you're meant to memorize, just as you're arching from the axis of childhood into the blood of desire and the agony of its objects you'll only later understand as infinite. I had a dream once where a boy no longer spoke. He walked around the house, though, with books under his arms, enormous books, full of knowledge, logic, and wisdom. When I inquired into his condition, his mother turned to me and whispered, he believed in a queen. Her eyes were bright with her secret of his devotion. He was not misled by his condition. His silence freed him from the need to speak. And in being freed from that need, he was freed from the incessance of world making, unfolding with anyone's every utterance. He studied utterance, surveyed worlds through words, protected through her power from their power. It has been written that simply laying one's eyes across writing, not any writing, across holy writing, is enough to be initiated into its wisdom, absent of reading, absent of cognition. There is a sympathy with the way the sun moves over all that's living, as if eyes or a single eye grazes over the text that is our earth, too simple or too sudden to be seen. Commenting on the vision of Isis, Chuck writes, sun and moon and alchemy represent the fundamental division of an inexpressible, imageless, primordial being into a pair of opposites, given as antithetical but essentially erotically coordinated principles. Father figures in the forms of flowers is a title that has floated around in me for years. The title formed when I looked over to a picture of my teacher and a white orchid eclipsed half of his face. I imagined every other father figure of mine, half hidden by a flower particular to our relation. My biological father, Michael, partially threw a bird of paradise, Robert a rose, George a lily, Chuck either a chrysanthemum or a rhododendron. Chuck comments further, still that which precedes cosmic order, unbridled creativity, prolixity, and ontic wealth, may seem to require taming by forces that combine cosmic pattern. Seeing fathers through flowers is a way of balancing the invisible source of both sun and moon. The indigo orange I drove through across the Rhinecliff Bridge, uplifted by clouds in the dazzling Hudson, burgundy red yet delicate, see-through, after having just emerged from the sooty underbelly of Ulster. I saw Aphrodite just ahead, and the sky darkened around the light of her sculpture, still in alabaster, at once blocking yet deciphering into the clouds and purifying breezes of the water white swirling around her orange center, though more red, pink, perennial. The hypostasis of the psyche, the incredible difficulty of describing, if beauty is what is seen, but also what is not seen, then who is Isis and what is this vision of her? Beauty, whether Isis or Aphrodite, is praised for her physical appearance. But is her appearance her power or her obstacle, her tool or her ruse? Do you ever get the impression that even the most beautiful golden light of the afternoon falling across stone when you're walking in a field next to someone you love, and the most heightened moments of your life you could call living, that even in this ripening, this fruit or fulfillment, when you say or want to say, this is so beautiful, You feel beauty escaping in the beauty you're beholding, that what you don't see or what you will not see is also beauty, the beauty of beauty twice born because endlessly conceived. Isis, or a vision of, when there is no beauty seen, she is the beauty of a feeling. When there is no beauty felt, she is the beauty of a thought. When there is no beauty thought, she is the beauty or the elegance of an ethic unfolding in the very moment of your need. The vision of Isis, induced by naming every alluring feature, and by so doing, you are able to see further. But you are an ass, a donkey from an unwanted realm of animals. That a goddess can be seen by an ass proves her adaptogenic compass, not her appearance, but her limitless ability, the nourishment and compassionate reach of her vitality. How her appearance crosses divisions of species and class, and to see her in that moment is to be her, and that anyone or anything can, just as holy writing is seen, and you are made holy immediately by it. But all writing needs to be holy for Isis to be actual. I need beauty, I shouted next to a former fashion designer with plenty of plastic surgery. Isis in the dimensions of her face, no longer hers, and her history, hidden in the industry of beauty. Was there still a dream of beauty? Shouted to her over the music in the center of the street on New Year's Eve. In the celebration of a new year, I longed for pagan spring. I wrenched myself out from under the shadow of the unearthly falsity of the Gregorian calendar and imagined an equinox. I invaded newness with presence, felt it draw backwards and forwards, pulsing like the heat above a train track, unsure if it was going or coming. The rain we were fearing fell lightly, barely even fell, seemed instead to leap upwards in miniature sprinkles from our faces. That's the end.
Alana, I think we're all very moved by your statement and by your reading.
Nice. Yeah, I felt like I didn't say, I just also wanted to say a direct thank you to Chuck for embodying this whole realm of magic and possibility and presence, that whenever I'm out of that realm myself, there's this part in my brain that thinks, well, at least Chuck is there.
Oh, thank you, Alana.
True.
Wonderful piece.
Okay, we are going to continue with our exploration of the vision of Isis with Robert Kelly. Just give me